seats up here.
Yes, there's one more row over here. Feel free to come over here.
There's
More
prizes.
seats in front. Please, let's run one more row here. And not too high.
They're skeptical. They're like, we'll see what happens and we'll leave.
Are these okay?
All right, welcome everyone. Shall we start now? Good. Sorry, a bit late because we are just coming over from the luncheon. It's quite chaotic out there. So, and our guests need to chat a bit as well. All right, good. Business. Thanks for choosing this section. I hope you will not be disappointed after all. I would say social entrepreneurship in the past 10 or 20 years, we have done a very good demonstration to the business sector as well, especially. How we can do philanthropy or charity in a different way. But and on the other hand, a lot more business people see the opportunity to see mutual benefit for doing social now. So I would say today we got a very good panel here to open up the discussions on how business could engage more. What is social innovation implied to the business world. So I would say here in this section I could tell there are a lot more people in suits. I suppose you are from the business sector maybe. So I think it's going to be a very interesting section here. We have more than enough time. So first of all, our three speakers will be opening with a 20 minutes speech, and then after that, there will be a 20 minutes panel discussions, and then I will actually combine that with some of the Q&A from the floor as well. So feel free to open up yourself to ask those expertise ask those experts on their opinion. So first of all, let me introduce our panel speakers. First of all is Mr. Richard Edwards, Third Sector Capital Partners. So his experience from the US is a lot more reference to us on this end of the world. So second one would be Mr. Richard Brubaker. He's the founder of Collective Responsibility from the United States. Sorry? Shanghai. All right. Yes. Organization is from US, but now you're more staying in Shanghai now. The third one, maybe you will find him very familiar, is Mr. Stephen Wong. He's a very famous financial commentator locally in Hong Kong, but at the same time he is the adjunct lecturer from the Chinese University of Hong Kong. So with no further ado, I think I will just let Rick to start off with his presentation. Let's give him a back to time.
Thank you, and it's very nice to be here again. I lived in Singapore, and it's very nice to get back to Hong Kong. I've done a lot of business also in Hong Kong, so it's great to be here. Thank you for inviting me back. You heard, many of you that went to the plenary session this morning heard about really how some of the high-level issues in working with governments, etc. I thought what I would do today is share with my time or my experiences as a partner at Third Sector Capital, working with 20 or more counties and state governments. I'm going to talk to you about some stories that are real. I'm going to talk to you about deals that we're working on, to try to share some of the lessons learned that I have experienced in the United States that could be potentially helpful here as Hong Kong government and also thinks about innovation. A real story up front I'm going to tell you is about a state that is very interested in increasing its employment and has a very serious problem with young juvenile justice offenders that are re-incarcerated. And I'm going to give you some statistics to show you this. In the state of Massachusetts, we have about 4,000 youths between the age of 17 to 24 that leave the probation systems of Massachusetts and youth service systems of parole every year. Within 3 to 5 years of that departure, 65% of those 4,000 youth go back to adult prison and serve an average of 2.3 years while they're there. Cost for that individual is roughly $50,000 a year. You multiply that out times that 65% for the cohort of 4,000, $285 million, staggering amount of money. So what we did at Third Sector, we are involved very much as facilitators in Boston. We work with state governments and county governments to develop program designs that bring innovation into their government programs. We sat down with the government of the Commonwealth, they call it, the governor's office and the treasury office. And at a very early stage, they formed a working group of multiple departments within the government, the treasury, etc. Because as you heard this morning, one of the things we found out that's very important is gain collaboration early. And I'm going to talk about the parties that we're talking about that we pull together in that, but it's very important to set up a working group. What does the government really want to achieve? Do they want to address aging? Do they want to increase employment? Then we all work together with the government to try to develop the best programs. Let's say an NGO, or in the case of the United States, a service provider, in this case, provided, in the case of Massachusetts, we are just completing a $38 million transaction, the largest in the world, which will be what we call Pay for Success and SIP. And what we're doing with that program is we determine with the state there are three primary objectives. One, reduce recidivism or reincarceration for these young men. Two, increase job readiness. And three, actually increase employed young men so that they become further taxpayers for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. That took a lot of time to come to that decision that those are the most important, we call metrics, to begin to work around. But a lot of parties collaborated, the government, the investor groups, the NGOs, the service providers, and said, this is impactful for the state of Massachusetts. And we could do the same thing, obviously, in Hong Kong. We're doing that across many other states and counties that are there. And so this is called Pay for Success. I'll be talking about this again. All we're saying at this point is that when the government becomes involved and pays for what we call impact, or pays for outcomes, they only pay if those three metrics I just mentioned truly are measured, truly are validated, and truly can show social impact and financial impact. And if they do, then the state will pay what we call success payments to, in fact, all the parties. That's a simple way of looking at it, pay for success. The idea of the financing behind it, I will talk about if people want to know more, but in simple terms, how do you finance these programs? The government could help finance it. We tend to leverage the financing of the government by bringing in the real innovation, bringing in high net worth individuals, family foundations, banks. We bring in philanthropies. And we can combine that diversity of what we call funding. We bring in businesses that want to help fund these programs and impact. You can imagine the scaling that enables. Instead of the government having to pay for this $38 million program, we ended up enabling all of the funding in Massachusetts to come from other private investors. The ability, therefore, of the program to scale, which you heard about this morning, to serve more communities, to serve more youth, to get more outcomes over here, to get more people working, to get less people going back to jail, is very, very powerful. And none of this could have been done in a preventive way without having a working group with the government and bringing in outside parties to help fund and bridge, I call it provide bridge capital to start to pay for some of these services. So who are the parties that all get together in these transactions? This will give you a quick feeling. We call it government or donor agencies, and by that I mean there could be several departments. What's interesting is we determine that sometimes departments don't talk to each other. It's in every government. They do. They don't always see something eye to eye. We ended up bringing parties together from Treasury, the parole, the employment, but different parts of the government. And all of a sudden, they sat at the same table, said, we have one common goal. We are going to go ahead and meet those 3 metrics and make a difference in innovation and make a difference in impact. And what was really interesting, it turns out that all of those departments, and this is true over 12 months, actually each had a role that they sometimes didn't know to impact that young man to try not to go back to prison, but in fact to go into the workforce in a sustainable way. Tremendous communication improvements. One of the biggest benefits and innovations I see with Pay for Success, but it's hard to measure, is that all of a sudden you're changing the way governments look at contracting, you're changing the way governments talk to each other within the departments, and they work well with other people now in the private sector as well, and all of a sudden you're creating more efficiencies. It's hard to quantify because it takes years to actually prove that these outcomes are going to occur. So investors are brought in, service provider or NGO provides the needed critical social human services. And then this is an important point that someone was asking about before the meeting. We bring in, we meaning the government, or we, the investors, would bring in an independent evaluator. Why? Because it's only when the independent evaluator verifies that the NGO or the service provider in fact is achieving the outcomes. The NGO can say they are, but the independent evaluator representing all the parties says that they've actually achieved that outcome. If they achieve the outcome, the evaluator reports back to the government. The government has what we call Pay for Success contract. The government is saving money, the government is seeing social impact, and the government has previously agreed with the contract to pay back the businesses or to pay back the service provider a success payment, a reward for actually achieving that superior performance. And that's what Pay for Success is. It's a very powerful way of bringing it all together. And then lastly, you have the government oftentimes keeping savings. So we in the state of Massachusetts and in many other states, even after they pay, there's a break even on a graph, even after they've paid out these success payments, we'll have net savings to the government to be used in other critical social services. So it's quite a good way to do it. Very quickly, to give you a feel, in the United States, we obviously are all over the world. You've heard that from Rosemary in Australia and the UK. It's very, very healthy, but in the United States today, we have no less than 20 different states or counties that are actively looking or are involved in transactions around Pay for Success and social innovation financing. And someone mentioned earlier today, don't worry when you hear SIBs, DIBs, social development it's all a family of financing tools that can simply be applied against Pay for Success. It could be a bond market in Australia. I will honestly tell you, in the United States, we do not have a bond market. We don't have that yet. We simply have a combination of funding that's put together in a capital stack to fund the transactions. Maybe there'll be a bond market at some point, but at this point, just to show you, it's a very healthy and growing interest area for governments in the United States. As I mentioned before, the innovation here is very, very strong. And as around who are the investors that we're getting interested in? I think that's really, really important to think about. We are very involved right now with senior debt providers, which usually tend to be investment banks, philanthropic people putting in PRIs or subordinated debt to these transactions. We then have grants, putting in philanthropic grants. And the nice thing about all this, that you can see, these are just different examples of some of the investors. But we're trying to give these people don't make a lot of money. It's a social impact return, so it's below market at this point. These are not commercially investable projects. Someone asked me, I was testifying in the government, they asked me, why don't you give these people a 40% return on their investment? And I said, wait, these are pilot projects around social impact. And you can get a return like an interest rate, but you cannot expect that you're going to get a significant return on your investment on a social service project with this kind of innovation. Maybe 10 years from now, maybe. But right now you have to, these investors are settling because they're getting a double bottom line impact. Financial return, yes, but a huge social impact too. Sorry, I think it was mine or somebody else's.
Wasn't me.
Oh, that was my one. No, Richard, you must have done that, I'm sure.
Time is not up yet.
I don't mean to confuse you by this slide, but I just wanted to give you a flow of just for a moment. So if you look on the left-hand side of the slide, funding comes in to a project company. And these are typical of all of the business projects we're doing right now in the United States. So funders, whoever they are, fund a project company. The project company is set up as a limited liability company, nonprofit or for-profit, for reasons that makes a lot of sense. You don't want the government totally involved. You don't want all the investors. It should be limited liability in nature. We call it limited liability partnerships, but it is a project company. So the funds flow into the project company. The project company then sends the money through to the NGO or to the service provider to pay for the operating services of these great social service programs. And then I mentioned that keyword evaluators over on the right-hand side, who is simply hired by the project company to verify that in fact the social outcomes are being met. If we're going to be innovative, we need independent verification that we're making the impact we say we are. And all parties agree, by the way, to the evaluator. So therefore, if that evaluator says you've made your impact, then what happens is the government, Hong Kong government in this case, would then say, okay, great, I'm obligated to make pay for success payments under a contract based upon successful performance. They pay back these success payments to the project company. Project company is a pass-through and passes the money back in the form of debt repayments to whoever funded it, as well as will in fact pay a return on investment, small but a good return on investment to the investors if there's superior performance, socially and financially. So it's not as difficult as it looks. It's a complete, really, circle. And someone's going to ask me, I know, so I'm going to say real quickly that on a governance basis, the way these are governed is the project company, in our case, we set up an oversight council based upon consensus, not upon voting rights. And if there's disagreements amongst the project parties because something's not working, the only way you actually go beyond the consensus is you go to what they call binding arbitration in the United States, and that settles it. So we got into that again, brought everybody together on the same page on a collaborative basis. So in closing, my thoughts perhaps for the Hong Kong government, I've been talking with several people, why not at this stage, we don't need to worry about the transaction here. Transactions occur, they'll take time. But stepping back a minute, what we spend a lot of time with governments on is forming a working group. Set up a working group where with the efficiency unit, for example, or other parts of the government, pull the parties together, and let's decide on what impacts are key to the Hong Kong government. Let's decide on what metrics are important to measure against that outcome. And then at that point, you bring in communication, you bring in the parties in the community to work together to reach that objective. And then what happens, and this is happening in real time in a lot of different governments, is that leads to a transaction. And at that point, you can bring investors, you can develop and scale your NGO. It's very, very opportunistic at that point to try to grow the opportunity. And then everybody tends to be talking a lot at that point to get the project done. Okay, hope you guys enjoyed that. Thank you.
Thanks, Ray. I think we have many more friends coming into the room, so we are adding some chairs on there. Thank you so much. And next time, Mr. Richard Brubaker is going to share with us his experience, especially I think from the Asia perspective. He's been spending a lot of time in Asia and China as well. So I think he will tell us a bit about what's going on in that region.
I'll try. I'm a little nervous though, because they're bringing chairs in, and I need for them to start taking them out.
Are you speaking Mandarin or English?
Oh, 我可以讲普通话，没问题。Okay, so very quickly, I have 20 minutes. I tend to speak very fast. I apologize. But a lot of what's being said is kind of, that I've seen this morning, is really feeding my own fuel in terms of delivering this. Hairline aside, this is a picture of me, or at least it has been for the last 10 years. I was a social entrepreneur throwing rocks at the ocean. And for those of you who are social entrepreneurs or socially minded, I have some good news for you, which is this is changing. This isn't, but that is. So I'm going to talk about the corporate perspective, and as you can tell, I'm going to make fun of myself while I'm doing this. So to kind of wrap up, there was some discussion and some questions about business and CSR and sustainability. So I'm going to actually tackle that first, because this is something I've been working with quite a bit as a professor of sustainability at the China Business School, but also as a consultant helping multinationals develop sustainability strategies, and as an entrepreneur developing my own NGOs across Asia. I have a multitude of hats. It's in the brief. Happy to talk to you about it later. But I really want to get into the content itself about what we see happening when it comes to social innovation, corporate social innovation, and social entrepreneurship, because they're coming together. Now, the old model, the model we're currently in, and I think that we're about to see be disrupted on some level, is the fact that if you take one person, you put them into a city, you get 4 times GDP. It's a very basic element. It's why everyone in China right now is trying to pack into the major cities. It's why all the economic growth is built around that model of urbanization and developing services in the urban environment. But what we're seeing, though, is that this model is basically built on the idea that resources were cheap, consumption is key, waste goes away, and no one is responsible. Now, we can talk about each one of these for hours. I've only got 18 and a half minutes. But what I'm going to say is that this is changing, and I'll get into that a little bit more, but what it's doing is as these constraints are becoming more tangible, it's opening up more opportunities for those who are socially innovative. So, while we had this going on, the traditional modern economy, social entrepreneurship was considered cute and cuddly, which is why I was throwing rocks at the ocean for so long. But what was interesting was the hero stories that were starting to come out over the last 10 to 15 years. And you'll probably recognize one or more of these. Ray Anderson, Paul Pullman, Esquell, Timberland. You can name them for a while on kind of 1 or 2 hands. These are the leaders who kind of looked out at their value chain and went, something's wrong. We're not aligned with the environment, with the economy, with society. It could be all 3, it could just be one of them. But in Ray Anderson's words, it would be a spear in the chest to them. They would take it upon themselves as an individual leader to make a change. And that has largely been the story of social entrepreneurship. It's been largely about the entrepreneur seeing a gap and taking upon themselves to move things forward. The problem is that as this is occurring, as these hero stories are up front, behind the scenes, the negative externalities of the modern economy have grown in size, scale, and frequency. I've lived in Shanghai for the last 13 years. I believe I'm at kind of the ground zero for scalable negative externalities. If it wasn't obvious 6 months ago, the 18,000 pigs that floated by our city were certainly a good sign for that. I can't tell you, I've worked on over 200 projects in China. I'm an optimist, I'm not a pessimist. But you do see where these externalities come to life in some very ugly ways, but have some very simple roots behind them that we can now start addressing because they're finally tangible. I can talk to you about polar bears in Cardigan all day long. The chairs will start emptying out. But if I start talking about affordable housing, elderly care, safe food, maternity, these issues are things that it'll resonate with you somewhere. And that's what's starting to drive things. So the polar bears are making way as an emotional icon when Hurricane Sandy and the recent one in the Philippines and one a couple years ago in Myanmar and a couple years ago in India. These are tangible. These are things that we're finally saying something's wrong. And that's being matched by technologies and voices, transparency, where people can be engaged at a much higher level than ever before, and tangibly. I went to Copenhagen, I went to the big show, everyone was engaged. WWF had millions of people on their email list, but it didn't transact because there wasn't actual engagement. Wen Jiabao, Obama, everyone left on the day they were supposed to leave, not when they were supposed to actually sign the contracts, not when they agreed that something was wrong and something needed to be done. It was on a schedule. That's changing. And for many companies, changes are coming. If you haven't worked that out yet, you will hopefully see that by the end of this presentation. So what I've been calling business as usual is changing, and we've heard this a little bit this morning, but the idea that CSR and sustainability are extra. And if you're looking at this map, looking for social innovation, I'll help you. It's here. I don't know if any of you studied statistics, but that's a really small amount. Growth was the primary goal. The models were heavily subsidized. And if you don't understand that, then you need to look at the economy around energy, food, transportation, manufacturing, population. Our governments, our economy have been heavily subsidized, whether it was debt to equity issues, or it was just saying we're only going to charge this much for energy in the economy. As long as energy is cheap, we can deliver cheap goods. Externalities were somebody else's problem. I apologize if I mentioned your firm here, but think of Apple and Foxconn, or think of Yum and their chicken farmers, or think of others where I'm the brand, I outsource to somebody else, so my legal responsibility is not clear. I can easily say no, it's their responsibility. So responsibility and accountability were mutually independent. If it was really egregious, like Yum in China, then the external stakeholder, the consumer, the government, would act against the brand immediately because they knew they ultimately would have the power if somebody held them responsible, legal or otherwise. To where we're shifting. We're moving to a place where CSR and sustainability are in the core. I call it beyond business as usual. This is where growth will be achieved through quality. Now, I don't have an exact model for this. I don't know how it's going to play out, so you're going to have to bear with me here. But the economic and business models are going to happen at full cost. If you look at what's happening in China or in the region, energy prices going up, water prices going up, every material that's going into these factories is going up, including labor. And it's not just because it's good for us to be nice to labor. It's because labor's saying we're not going to work for you anymore unless you do this, this, and this. Right? So it's external and it's internal, which means the externalities are actually being internalized. You're having to pay at Foxconn, not just minimum wage set by Shenzhen. You're having to give them classes that bring development. You're having to find ways to bring their family from those regions into their factory. So that way you're actually creating almost what you would see in any other country in the world, which is where there's a fair labor agreement that's not necessarily in contract, not necessarily in law, but is expected by those on the factory floor. And then responsibility and accountability are aligned. And where I see this most recently would be the H&M Accord, which was signed after the Bangladesh crash. You can look at the Walmart one, you can look at H&M, and there's one big difference. The H&M one is legally binding. If labor on the factory floor of an outsourced supplier wants to hold H&M accountable, there's now a legal mechanism to do that. So responsibility and accountability are becoming aligned again, which is almost creating this idea with people I talk with in apparel, electronics, and other areas where a large amount of outsourcing is considered. The risk for outsourcing is growing to the point where now these firms are thinking about internalizing their operations again. Alignment. And if I look at my clients for the last year on socially innovative ideas, it could be environmental, it could be social, it could be economic. The one thing that's becoming clear to them, or that's becoming clear to me that they're seeing, besides the fact that all the logos are blue, with one exception. So I think if you have a blue logo, you're definitely socially innovative. Causality, they're starting to understand their future rests in the ability to understand environmental, social, and economic concerns of the community, not the market, that is occupied by citizens, not consumers. I can't tell you how many clean tech conferences I've been to, how many government conferences I've been to, how many random conferences I've been to, where you will not hear the word citizen mentioned once. But we're all supposed to benefit the world without talking about citizens. It's always about consumers, it's always about the market, it's always about investors, regulators. It's the people that ultimately have to be appreciated, understood at the top. And this is actually one of the interesting questions over lunch was, how do we get the people at the top, ground up and top down? If the leaders don't understand what's going on outside their four walls, we're in for a very difficult transition to get that grassroots movement up, because that middle space is still a large void. And so we have to move from, and these are 2 emails that I've received in the last 6 months. It wasn't sent by FedEx, it's just a nice visual representation. This is CSR. I spoke to our regional HR about the program. Basically, she agrees that the hospital visit program best fits with our needs, right? Fits with our needs. Moving forward, I'd like to receive a detailed proposal and cost indication from your organization. Please see our preference outline. They're just dictating what is good for them. They're holding off as best they can the inevitable shift that's coming to their business. We'll use CSR, we'll use sustainability, we'll sponsor a green event, we'll offset. You're holding off the inevitable. To a model where this is a different company, they make shampoos, soap, they also make food. So 80% of their 80% of their footprint is water-based. I'm responsible for water-related innovation in a company where we believe it needs some radical rethinking. Some things that we've long taken for granted need to be challenged. For example, the use of water in our daily lives. After I met him for coffee, he said in 20 to 30 years we see much of the world without water. How do you survive as a soap, shampoo, and noodle company without water? It's a tough one, right? It's also something that we have to start thinking about as individuals. I, as a middle-aged balding man, I'm going to be okay taking a shower every day using gel. So the ladies in the room are going to want shampoo, to feel clean. So we actually end up, after about 3 hours, talking about how do you take a gel shower, right? This is how far certain companies are going now. They're thinking 2030, 2050, 2080, because they realize that their model is under attack, not because they are or are not a good company, but because they have to understand what the external environment is going to provide them in 50 years, which is radically different than what it is now. So we're moving from an area of we comply to some companies who are saying we contribute. Does anyone recognize this man? Please, nobody. Nobody. Interface Flooring, Ray Anderson. Clicking? Okay, all right, got one up here. All right, so carpet, you're all sitting on top of it. This is modular carpet, I like because I can see little squares. He is basically the guy who pioneered this stuff. Now, over the course of his life, and he tragically did die about 2 years ago, his company is still doing very well. They're the largest modular carpet company in the world. Carpet is petroleum, period, right? You have 3 different layers. You have the tuft, you have the rubber backing, you have the nylon in between. It's petroleum. They've basically gotten down to the fact where if it used to be you lay this one piece, and if somebody spilled a glass of wine or whatever, they have to take the whole piece up and throw it out and relay it, right? So imagine the waste. He's got it now to where you take one thing up, right? But instead of it all having to look the exact same, he's created a design using biomimicry so you can put it wherever you want. And a couple of applications that were really interesting lately were around airplanes. Anyone work in the airline industry? Again, donuts. Okay. When you have to replace carpet in an airline, you have to put it in a hangar, rip out all the seats, rip out all the carpet, relay it, put all the seats in. It's 3 days. Now, if you're an airline, that's a lot of money, right? Particularly if you're a Chinese airline going between Hong Kong every hour, right? Well, every hour and a half or 3 hours, whatever they get off the ground. But what he's worked out is where basically you can lay that carpet at the gate in 5 minutes, creating massive opportunities. And the same for hotel room. You spill you spill wine, or you use the iron on the floor. Those are the 2 most popular ways to damage a carpet in a hotel. Instead of using 3 days, it's 5 minutes. And then finally, he's gone even further. I put the drift net on there because he's now worked out how to use drift nets in the ocean as raw material for his product. He went from a product 20 years ago that required 100% virgin material to one that only requires 20% virgin material. It's all recycled. And one that used to waste 100% to one that only wastes 30%. Their goal is by 2020 to be 0 on both. 0 virgin, 0 waste. Even at the consumer. That's innovative. And it means, if you look at the stock price, it's gone higher than any of his competitors. So, getting into the markets, I don't know, how am I doing on time? Okay. We have first world markets, and I'm going to use the hashtag here. Lifestyle, organic food, green products, green technologies. These are things that are going to make the urban environment comfortable, survivable for some, or just kind of will be things that as we develop our own mindsets, we'll bring into our lives. So I have a new baby in the family. we're going to organic milk, right? I mean, that's not something that the average person can afford. That's something that I can do to make sure that my family's safe. Look at education, healthcare. These are all things that you'll find in Asia and the big cities. And then at the bottom of the pyramid markets. This is equally interesting, even for some of my corporate clients, but also for the social entrepreneurs, which I'll get back to in a few minutes. Education, safety, elderly care, and access to resources, access to water. These are things that corporate or organization, SMEs, can bring to the bottom of the pyramid. And what we're going to find is actually, as these two markets grow, they're going to overlap each other. A lot of the technologies are applicable on both ends, as we've seen in pharmaceuticals. So for me, I see 5 things that corporates bring as they get interested in social innovation. And for some, this is kind of visceral in the good social innovation community because they want to kind of think of the ideas of their own. But when you get a corporation to come in and really start on a product basis or even on a small, limited portfolio basis to look at that market, bottom of the pyramid or first world, they're validating that market is real. What you are doing as an entrepreneur is not cute and cuddly anymore. It is something that really, there's a need, there's a market, there's an opportunity. They're bringing investment. They're laying the railroad. They're laying the infrastructure that most of the small enterprises don't have the ability to. And we were talking about this last night, where just think about the advertising that Unilever, Danone, Abbott have thrown behind organics. No socially minded entrepreneur in organics can replicate that. And every dollar they spend is money that the entrepreneur themselves and the social entrepreneurship model gets the benefit from. Because they're highlighting different things that everyone needs to be aware of. So they're bringing awareness. They're saying, I'm Coke, drink juice. I'm Coke, drink green tea. These are healthy for you. They're not saying that Coke isn't healthy for you, but they're saying that these other drinks are healthy for you. They're bringing systems. They're bringing scale. Manufacturing is coming online. Raw materials are now cheaper. Everything that is needed to make these unaffordable premium products affordable is going to be built through scale. And one client we were looking at, it was the nutritional product, that their first year sales expectations were $60 million in China. No entrepreneur could have achieved that in the same year because the brand was able to throw their entire organization, R&D, manufacturing, marketing, accounting, travel budgets behind that one idea so they can scale up very quick. And the last thing is profit. I don't think that we should all be driven by profit, but it definitely will help to bring in more players. It will help drive the investment community to get behind a number of these ideas that are just so plain obvious right now to those of us who don't care about profit. And that kind of gets back to the, you don't have to be profitable, but if that market itself is profitable, you will find more people getting in. And I feel kind of personally, if you can profit by doing good, it's a hell of a lot better than profit from doing bad, right? So let's get more people doing good. Which brings me to my last slide. I'm not going to get squashed by this rock, by the way. Well, some people might want me to. I'm an optimist at the end of the day, because I believe whether you're an entrepreneur, enterprise, or a corporate suit in this room, and you see a problem of social, environmental, or economic opportunity or problem, there's an opportunity that's coming. Now, it's not going to be tomorrow. It's going to take, I think in the next 5 or 10 years, you're going to see real scale around these issues. And it's going to start with the tangible. And it's going to move to the intangible, all right? So the polar bear is still always going to be intangible for some, but tangible for others. But food safety, milk powder, that's very tangible for men. The other thing is, for years, we've been kind of considered cute, cuddly, and nice to be good to society. That is going to change, because the value of having a sustainable, socially responsible, environmentally steward model of business is going to be valued by externals, government, consumers, citizens, and internals, your employees, your leaders, your suppliers. The business as usual model is shifting away from one that's defined by growth and CSR, sustainability as add-ons, to one where they're at the core. And this will really start to solidify a lot of these social innovation ideas that are possible to scale. Because the business itself, as they shift over, that point of social entrepreneurship being way off the grid will come into the middle of the grid. And then lastly, this is creating more opportunities for all of us every day. There's more media, more money, more government support, as we're seeing here, and more business models that are able to find sustainable models, sustainable value chains. It's not about donations anymore. It's going to be about investments. It's not going to be about, galas. It's going to be about revenue models. And that doesn't matter if you're profit or non-profit as an organization. All it means is if you have a value proposition to solve these issues, you're going to find it a lot easier over the next few years to develop your business, even at scale, than you were 10 years ago when I started skipping rocks off the ocean. So, thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the afternoon, and I look forward to the Q&A.
Thanks, Peter. We actually reflected a lot of rethink on the current system, including the local color. I saw a lot of people checking on their name card on the local color. Blue,
I just realized that's
blue is the color, right?
Blue.
I can recall IBM is blue.
Don't worry. All my sustainability is all red.
All right, so next coming up is Stephen. As you all know, especially those in Hong Kong, he had a lot of sharp comments on the current economy. So I think he's going to share with us on his views on the development of social entrepreneurship or social innovation as a whole. Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm trying to, from my perspective, answer this question. Business go social, why and how? After all, that's the topic of today. So I think it's really hard, right? I'm chairman of an NGO. I invested in equities, public investment, as well as social enterprises. So I'm a keen observer as to how the charity spectrum all the way to the sort of cutthroat, capitalistic business as usual spectrum. So how is this whole thing make sense as what we're talking about today? It's something that I wanted to really think hard about. So what is innovation? For me, that's a key point about whether you're doing nonprofit or social enterprises or business as usual, is obviously to create values and unlock the value of what we're doing. In Cantonese, we call it 諗條橋. So we've got to have something. The value either is untapped demand. For example, obviously the famous social enterprise Dialogue in the Dark, right? So where it's basically realized the untapped resources of people with bad eyesight or the blind people, to create that the demand for people that can go to do corporate outings or something, right? So that's the untapped demand, or make something more efficient delivery, right? So that is in Hong Kong we're all about services. There's a lot of innovation in services. There's about service delivery and new products. So I think social innovation for business is about obviously creating social values by business enterprises. So all these are very basic. I'm probably preaching to the choir as well, but that's great, right? So so that we can really struggle these together. I think it is very important for business sector, not just the social enterprises, frankly. I'm more interested in the entire business world getting together, getting behind the sustainability campaign. So why? Because business is the only place, right, where resources are created. Think about this, right? NGOs and governments are great institutions, but they reallocate resources, right? They redistribute resources. Business is where the resources are created. That's what we call creativity. You create something out of nothing. We are not trying to grab something from the rich and distribute to the poor. So business is important because obviously they create things. And so obviously business cannot substitute NGOs or government, but business can help to create social capital by innovations, right? So thinking back, what is capitalism? We just had this lunch. People generally in social enterprise say that we hate traditional capitalism. What do you hate about capitalism? But what do you like about capitalism? I like capitalism because it is very efficient, right? Because you cannot survive in a capitalist world if you are not efficient. What is efficient? Is that you can create values. It is very scalable. We talk about the problems of scalabilities at lunch. A lot of social enterprises are not scalable. Why? We have to think about this, right? Traditional capitalism is great because it's professional. Think about this, right? How many of you heard of people just come up with this great method of, for example, agricultural method? All of us have heard about this. But who has the agricultural expertise? Is it somebody with just a good heart can do it? No. Right? Creating, efficient, good agricultural process is. I invest in agriculture. I lose a lot of money in agriculture, by the way. So I know how hard it is. It's not for, amateur. Seriously, it's not just people with a good heart can do it. In order to actually, be able to overcome the logistical difficulties of an agricultural product, a lot of expertise and professionalism is put into it. I like capitalism because it encourages professionalism. And I also like capitalism because it's innovation. So efficient, scalable, professional, and innovative is what I like about capitalism. So the question I have is whether we can put all these resources that I just mentioned, professional, scalable, efficient, into doing social capital, right? That's why we think business is important, because business in traditional capitalism or reform capitalism can deliver the ultimate promise. That's for me. If you cannot transform capitalism, we cannot transform the society. This is my claim. Society cannot be transformed. This is my claim. Society cannot be transformed without transforming the mindset of how businesses are run generally, period. Right? So we can transform ourselves because all of us are choir, so I'm preaching to the choir. All of us want to do good, right? But if we cannot transform those sitting in Central, in all these glass office buildings, their mindset, there's no way the society can be transformed. And transforming the society is obviously our goal. So, so there would not be, and my second claim is that there would never be enough resources to resolve systemic poverty, whether it's absolute or relative. In Hong Kong, it's probably relative poverty. If business cannot be part of the solution by bringing in innovations, there's no way all of us, by looking around Hong Kong, we are all despair because of the relative poverty. If we cannot mobilize the business, we can do it together, we cannot solve the problem. We cannot solve it. So that is my two claims. And that is where I every day struggle with. Obviously, there are always objections. Particularly, I came from Chicago School of Economics, right? So people always say that I betray my traditions. Probably I did. But some people would say that objection number one, they say that by making money alone, business creates value for the society. Have you heard of this claim? Right? People say that, hey, forget about what you just said. Business, by making money alone, because you cannot make money if you have no value to the society, right? People won't buy your product, right? Really, that's an obvious answer. People only pay because they see value in what you create or deliver to them. So by making money alone, it shows that society values your product. So you create value for the society. Okay, so that's objection number one. Well, then I have to ask, obviously, is there a difference between value for the society versus social value, right? What value? Value to whom? In traditional capitalist society, obviously, people make money because they can deliver value to people that has money, that can afford to pay, right? So, which is why Bill Gates' famous quote is that this capitalism spend whatever 10 times more money in curing the baldness of people than curing the malaria.
That's good enough.
So why is that? Because obviously people with baldness, right, or 地中海in Chinese, because it is a value, we can resolve them. And by the way, those people that actually have baldness probably have a lot of money because they care about getting hair back. Right? But unfortunately, those with malaria, they have no money to pay. So yes, it is creating social value, but value for whom? For people that have money. That's how we traditionally work. So objection number one, for me, doesn't work because it only fulfill the value for the society, but not what we call social value. We got to focus on creating value for people that may not have the means to give you to pay you, right? So that's first objection. Second objection I often heard is obviously business ultimate responsibility is to the shareholders. So a paraphrase from what Milton Friedman said, business ultimate, social responsibility is to maximize profit. Obviously, my question is, what about other stakeholders, our employees, vendors, customers, etc. So that's to be obvious. Number three, I think that is more challenging because it is in some way true. Business should focus on its core competencies to maintain its competitive advantages. Often you said that the reason why capitalism is so efficient, so professional is because people do one thing. Do things that they are good at, that they have expertise in, so that you don't, digress yourself into doing something that you're not good at. So people are saying that, well, charity and NGOs are good at doing charities, right? Business, we're not good at doing charities. We just focus on making money, which is what we are good at, and leave the rest alone to the charities. Have you heard those comments before? What is your answer to that? What is your answer to that? I think there are a lot of, actually I do think there's a lot of truth to it, that we should focus on what we are good at. But my question is, why can't the core competency be unlocking of the social capital together with the financial return? Right? So we're not trying to ask you to do different things. For example, you do an agricultural company. Yes, continue to farm, but farm with a different mindset is what we are asking. Right? We're not saying that let's not do farming and then do education. Continue to farm, but farm with a different mindset. Right? So that's very different. So objection number 4 is the mission statement of companies to maximize profits. It's a bit like objection number 2. Objections, right? Not objection. Yeah. Objection number 4. People say that, the mission statement of the companies is to maximize profit. But rarely though. I mean, seriously, what is the last time? I don't know whether you have read mission statement of listed companies. I have, rarely there's some, which I find is quite interesting because they would literally say that the only mission statement of this company is to maximize the profits, right? So there are 1 or 2 companies come across like that, which I think is pretty interesting. But generally, nowadays, right, companies generally recognize that the mission statement can't just be profit maximization. They usually, put something more to it, right? I will show you a little bit more later. But for me, profit to business, this I'm citing from someone else, is like air to humans, right? Is essential, it's necessary, but it's not sufficient. I.e., yes, obviously we need air to breathe, but we can't say that the goal of our living is to breathe, right? So obviously companies need to make profits, but it doesn't say that. The purpose of a company is to make money. That is not a mission. That is just like breathing. That's essential, but the mission is what? To deliver something, to create something, to be a purpose, to be something, right? So that is a mission statement. So how to do it? How to do it? Is it more CSR projects? More employees volunteering? More charity donations? More this, more that? More whatever, add on to whatever you're doing? Is that it? How else the entire business world is transformed to be of use to the society? Is it just more? I submit to you that I don't think it's just more actually. Frankly, I think it's quite easy. I think they just need to be more serious about executing the company statement, the mission statement. I'll show you one mission statement, which is X-Mobile. X-Mobile. So it's a real company. So I'm not gonna. I don't want to have any lawsuit against me. So is X-Mobile in China. So that is their mission statement. Okay. So let's just go through the mission statement. is creating boundless communication, building an information society. This means X Mobile strives to allow everyone to enjoy the pleasures of communication anytime, anywhere, in any way, to enjoy the freedom mobile phones bring to life. X Mobile mission is also to broaden its mission and ability to master changes. And this is crucial, and to make the world a wonderful paradise. Really? Okay. X Mobile vision is becoming the provider with superior quality. And emphasis on quality best demonstrates commitment to excellence and social responsibility. Only by creating superior quality for society can X Mobile realize its value proposition. And seriously, it is I just copied it right out from their website. Okay, so are they serious about it? Are they serious about creating a paradise? So, paradise, everyone can use their mobile phone. But seriously, if you think about this, if they are serious to their mission statement, forget about the paradise joking part. The part about bringing mobile and free communications and easy communications to people in remote area, in the villages, in the poverty area where people cannot afford to have education. They can actually use the mobile device to help them. How much value they can create, not just financial return, but definitely closer to the paradise than right now. So it is in their expertise, they're not doing extra. I'm not asking them to do more. They just need to what? Focus on their core competencies, which is what? Telecommunications. Deliver telecommunications to those who don't have it, right? So it is right in their core competencies. They're good at it, they can do it in a scalable way, efficient way, and professional way. Not you, not me can replicate what they can do. Right? We have a good heart, we cannot do what they can do in changing this world. If they're serious to their mission statement. So the key is not to add on to what they can do in their CSR, is to take this mission statement seriously. And they should be held accountable for it. And that's our purpose. Right? So, and lastly, I think, frankly, it is obviously, you can't manage what you can't measure, which is going back to the measurement part. The only way the management are incentivized to work on this goal, not just the financial return, but the social return or the social capital, is obviously we can demonstrate, the value of the social capital, and which is why, as advertisement, we're starting up a social measurement, impact measurement society in Hong Kong as well, because we realize how important it is to actually measure that social impact, because it is a very management slang. What you can't measure, you won't manage. So with that, I will leave to thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I think after the three opening sections, I think at the beginning we talked about why and how. I don't think we should. We need to struggle on why now. You have more than enough rationales that why we have to continue to talk about the action plan. So I think right now in the next 20 minutes on the panel discussions, I would like to focus back on with an action mode, how we can do it. But I think you might agree with us that in Hong Kong and maybe in part of the Asia, we're at the very infant stage. Business people, investors would like to participate. But I would like to walk through a skeleton like the past, now, and future. Let's turn the clock back. In the past, at the beginning of the movement in some other area, when you see that, mostly why people have the challenges, all the obstacles that prevent them from participating from business sectors or from the investment sectors. I know that there are a lot of things going way beyond. It's very sophisticated now, but we want to go back to Hong Kong, as we're at the beginning. So this is the past part that I would like to you to throw a lot of thoughts, maybe with some examples. real-life examples. So now, currently, what we see is the hot topics that we're debating on, or what are the major challenges that we can see maybe in the next 1 or 2 years. And in the future, I think a lot of people, especially from the investment sectors, will talk about whether we are creating another bubble with, for example, social investing and things. I would like to get your views on how you think that would be. So feel free to chip in all different parts. Maybe we'll start with Rick.
Fine. Is this Stone? Yeah, that's good. I'll just make a couple of comments because if I'm reading, for instance, what you're suggesting, what do I see, is really not just Hong Kong. It's across a lot of governments, and not only in Asia, but in Europe and in the United States. And so just what I'm seeing in the past is that historically, what we are now seeing, and this is, I think, very much across a number of different government institutions and agencies, is a way of what I call contract procuring, where when they go out and they work with an NGO or service provider, for example, they are used to writing a service contract, and that contract is then implemented on the basis of what we call treatment for people going into a service. They're treated upon, it might be the number of people they treat going into a program, very historically accepted. I use the analogy, for example, if we have poverty, and we're addressing poverty right now, we have 100 different people that are impoverished. You take those 100 people now, they may be getting wonderful food service programs, they may be getting wonderful permanent housing, they might be, temporary housing, they might be getting emergency treatment at a hospital. What I see governments thinking about now is, that's wonderful, there's nothing wrong with those services. What if they changed the contracting such that you focused on those same 100 people in the future that are now being treated that are impoverished? And you then say, okay, I'm going to put a third of those people into permanent housing, not temporary housing. I'm going to retrain another third of those people so that they can get into sustainable long jobs, which will become taxpayers, and then they will not become impoverished. And lastly, I'm going to put in health programs so that those people actually become very healthy, then they will not require emergency treatment. So I'm actually seeing what I think is healthy as a different mentality process. And this is not just the government. A lot of people like ourselves as entrepreneurs are thinking this and communicating with our people and friends in government to think this way. And then you get into that process of how you actually implement it going forward in terms of what I call paper success.
I don't know, I think a couple of the hurdles that I see are, the first one is a lot of the conversations that we have at this point are tactical and not strategic. So we're talking about how to mitigate carbon. We're talking about how to arm teachers as a response to guns in the classroom. We are not talking about the big issues of how do we find a balanced economy that is not energy intensive, therefore doesn't pollute. We're not looking at that end of it. We're really looking at the emission itself and not the system. And I think that that's one big area, because that gets back down to your value overall. Like, what is your vision? If it's to make profit and that's your only mission, then you're leaving behind the rest of the paragraph, which says within social norms, within expected norms, which is actually the back half of Friedman's paragraph. And I think this is also really important. When we talk about leaders, we're not talking about leaders who have big visions right now. I think that's changing. I see a lot more, particularly in the youth that I teach. I teach at MBAs and EMBAs. But I don't see that necessarily until Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, they get to, where they're comfortably retired. We need that group that are sitting in the seat, CEO, presidents, whatever, their first couple of years, really take on a new vision for how the company's going to move forward. And I think the last half is capacity. Scale for me is probably the most abused term in the entire industry at this point, because we don't have the capacity to get most enterprises from 3 to 5 people out. Let's say we talk about regionalization. I scaled an enterprise to 4 cities. It was by far the most painful experience I've ever been through. It took 2 years. We went up, we went down, we went up, we went down. But nobody talks about those challenges, those lessons. It's always scale will give you money. Scale will incubate you. But it's not about actual incubation, it's about warehousing. just have a desk, good luck, we'll see you in 2 years, we hit our KPI. So I think that, it's vision, it's capacity, and then at the end of it, it's maintaining the same values or maintaining the same mission, which you see a lot of organizations creep around. And that's corporate too. I mean, the other thing is, well, he's talking about the best of capitalism. The other 95% of it has failed. You look at the success rates of restaurants, of banks, of VC funds. I mean, there's high failure in traditional business too. And I think we as the good entrepreneurs, we almost have this different level that we all have to be 100%, which I think is another issue. So there's a multitude of issues, but at the end of the day, it's all in our heads, right? I mean, when our heads and our hearts actually align, a lot of these questions, capitalism with conscious, it'll all come together.
I got a follow-up question on that. I picked up the point on the vision, the mindset change of the top guy. Can you quote that as an example that you think is a very successfully, or you get engaged with the business sector, and then the top guy changed somehow with some way, and then what he did at the very beginning?
I'll go back to Ray Anderson as the example that's actually come all the way around. I think it was 1985, roughly. A big client came up to him and said, "What's your environmental statement? What are you doing for the environment?" Now, I put up there, "We comply," and that was actually the only thing he could say. They complied by all the laws and regulations of every government, local, state, federal, international, but they didn't go further. And that question set off, he basically brought in leading NGOs, leading policymakers, leading consultants on manufacturing, biomimicry, to basically turn this company around to, they're almost at zero waste, zero virgin material. That's a great example. Unilever, I think, would be the next hero that we all hear about now, Paul Pullman. And I won't confirm or deny anything because I do have to have an NDA in place. But I will say that where he's taken his firm's vision is very different from the past. And he has to, like Lee Scott at Walmart, really turn around a huge organization. What you're going to see is that it comes in pieces. It won't be all at once. It'll be around palm oil, it'll be around products. They're not going to get it all right at once. Hopefully on their timeline, but most likely not, because we've seen it at Walmart and other big organizations. But where I see the biggest success or failure of anyone who has a new vision is their ability to internally engage. Ray Anderson went to every site, year after year, month after month, talking about his vision, buying people in constantly. Then he went off-site second. The CEOs that I know at Interface weren't allowed to talk about what they're doing for 10 years. If you look at Walmart, Unilever, and others, it's very external to start, and the internal has to catch up. And that's kind of two ways to look at it. So I think they're successful visionaries, but transacting on that can be very difficult.
Stephen, I think especially on social investments in general, how we can...
Yeah. So I think in a way, sometimes I agree that we tend to really focus on the success. What is success of social enterprise to you? What is it? So some people say, okay, how much you can do with scalability, for example. So what is the success to you? For me, social enterprise is a movement, it's a campaign. The success is to force changes, right? For example, now Michael Porter was talking about shared capitalism. They were also talking about conscious capitalism, creative capitalism. Why all these terms coming up? Because the mainstream guys are forced to really face head-to-head with this social enterprise movement that combines enterprising spirit with charity. If they can do it, why can't you? They do have to answer this question. For example, Nestle, right? The chairman of Nestle, they were together with Michael Porter. So talking about this, okay, so how Nestle what social impact Nestle as a huge company can do for the society, right? So for me, social enterprise is a huge campaign that actually force people, the mainstream guys, to really face head-to-head this question. These guys, with little resources, little money, with little networks, they can achieve so much. Why can't you? Right? So that is a huge campaign.
Great.
Yeah, I just have another thought that's really, you would think that when large investors like investment banks on Wall Street get involved in social impact projects and innovation, that it is you wonder why are they investing in projects that have below commercial rates of return? Are they really investing in it because they truly are altruistic and want to have just social impact? And what's happening, and it's revolutionary, is that the high net worth individual and most of these large financial institutions have major wealth management programs within their firms, are telling them in very direct terms that they wish their funds, as well as the firms who manage their funds, to become much more involved in social impact and social innovation, oftentimes realistically with, again, below market returns, but as a percent of the overall portfolio, it's still fairly insignificant, but I think it's going to continue to grow hugely. So we are seeing people who are saying, wait a minute, why is an investment bank going to invest in a social impact project with a state in the United States when they can alternately take those same dollars and put it into Community Reinvestment Act, we call other programs where they can get higher returns. And much of it is coming directly from their constituents, their individual account holders, they're also their funds and these private investors who are making it very well known to them that they expect them to change the way they behavior. So it's very interesting, almost reverse ploy to see what's happening with, and I think it's I think Australia, for example, is ahead with the funds. That's going to drive more of our investment funds to be directing their investments in the United States that way also.
So just to follow, actually using the Nestle example, corporate social innovation versus social entrepreneurship. For many years, we've heard about fair trade, fair labor coffees. And there's got to be 150 brands out there. Now, we can question why there's so many brands that are doing the exact same thing, but one of the biggest programs I've seen actually at Nestle, and we did a competition for them, was around their new Nespresso line is a premium brand. And it's a premium bean as well. Like a very small fraction of coffee beans can be put into these little tin, one-use items. For them, their hardest problem in sourcing this is that the social conditions on the farm in Colombia, in Costa Rica, in these areas, is basically removing the farms. The youth do not want to work on the farm, period. And it's not just an economic thing, there's many other things around it. So what they had to do is unwind their supply chain and start with, how do we work with farmers as individual human beings, keep them on the farm, make them happy, make it worthwhile, and then build from there. And kind of to wrap around, their ability to scale, they're not talking about 150 or 10 farmers, they're talking tens of thousands, 200,000 to 500,000 farmers they need. They don't have yet to match their growth of their business. So actually, social innovation is supply chain management. It is basically how you create a mission and understand those outside what used to be your third concentric ring, as a stakeholder engagement. So.
Let's turn back from another perspective to look into this. In Hong Kong right now, as you all know, that there is 500 million Hong Kong coming up by the government, as you heard about in the morning. It's a social innovation and entrepreneurship fund. This question is actually asked on behalf of Patricia. So if you are a policymaker, in terms of how these funds could leverage the business sectors or investors outside, if you are the policymaker, what would you recommend to do? They're quite open-minded now, by the way, so we need more wisdom from you guys.
I think the question was how would we
you got 500 million. How do you engage with business with that?
Without a doubt. At this point, I believe very firmly that you have number one, that you have to fund. You should be funding, as I mentioned in my earlier talk, you should be funding early research, working group activity at this stage. You could be working around an issue area, but I point out that I've not heard much about what are the key issue areas with the Hong Kong government. I think that's a very fundamental discussion that should be open to a collaborative working group at an early stage. And you'll find that you'll get tremendous backing from the community that way. Solicit the community. We go right out into the community in the U.S. and put them into the working group. We try to take, and it works very well, the politics out of it. Because when you come to these types of decisions at this stage, it's a very much everybody wins. And while we have a very interesting activity going on right now, that you actually pull the governments together better, because the decisions around social impact, believe it or not, are not one party versus the other. It's totally apolitical. So start early, bring the parties together on a working basis, and that's how you could use the dollars most wisely early on. Wait another year, the transaction will come, the funds for investment can come, But first, talk.
So I would just say that, 500 million split between four is 125 million. I'm okay with that.
Thank you. That's what I want to.
I think you definitely need to start with research, and I've talked to a number of people in this audience about that before. The other thing I think beyond that is also funding the organization's capacity as well. I've always enjoyed, as a founder of an organization, my donors telling me that we need full accounting and transparency and everything, but no one's willing to pay for the accountant, right? We have to go find a pro bono accountant who will do it for us because none of my donors will give it to because they don't trust. So this needs to kind of change. We can't be afraid of capacity within the organization. I also look at incubation. How can you work with the incubators to create true incubation, but also to maintain a long-term model besides the 2 years incubating the entrepreneur into more of an organizational-based model where the second and third generation of leaders can also be incubated at the same time. I just put in my third generation at my first NGO, and we were super excited, but it took us a little bit longer because we had to really spend time with the rest of our employees to get them ready for that transition. And there isn't much in terms of availability when it comes to that service level, internal or external, to really make that happen. I mean, we're really struggling with that. So a few different ways: research, capacity, training. Yeah.
I just add one thing really quickly. I think just the fund is a bit like venture capital, right? So we run a venture capital fund, and you know how hard it is to. The most difficult part is what? It's obviously to have the professional advice to making operational and business success, right? So it's all about the human resources to actually leverage the entrepreneurs to succeed, right? So a lot of people have good hearts, but not a lot of people have business skills, right? So, or a rare combination of business skill and a good heart is obviously rare. So, so for us, it's great, right? So, I mean, the key to success is obviously to have people like that to, really empower entrepreneurs. Because what I see is a lot of, not just in social enterprise, even in business world, right? The VC fund. Hong Kong sucks, right? We don't have angel funds, we don't have VC funds, right? So why is that, right? Because we really don't have that culture yet. I'm just not talking about social enterprise. I'm talking about angel funding. I'm talking about social VC funding generally in Hong Kong. Risk capital, exactly. Early stage risk capital that, the venture capitalists can really give the operational expertise to entrepreneurs. We don't have that culture here. So we do need to have that entire what we call biosphere to really build up.
Don't be afraid to fail.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Since you're not in Hong Kong, so Stephen and I can take care of the fund. So don't worry.
Actually, I'm here every month.
I'll fly over.
All right, why don't we open to the floor? Any questions from the floor?
All right, 100 minutes.
Please, on that side. Can someone pass the microphone to that? I can do that.
Mr. Robin.
Hi, I have a question for Stephen, also for Rick. Stephen, thank you very much for the speech. Thank you very much. Just realized we're also Chicago alum. Quick question on this slide. Both you and Rick mentioned the importance of evaluation, also impacting of measurement. Can you please elaborate a little more on what are the best practices you have seen so far? Any good methodology you can recommend? Thank you.
Thank you. I think Rick had a workshop tomorrow on that, right? I just went to a 2-day workshop on the SROI, social impact management measurement. So, frankly, no accounting is perfect, right? For those who work for us, who work looking at bank statements or financial accounting all the time, we know that sometimes really arbitrary for how people account financially, right? So socially, it's harder even, but we got to start somewhere. There's no perfect mechanism, but I do think it is very important to really think hard about, what sort of impacts that we have created, because sometimes we tend to overstate it. Sometimes we might, this thing might happen without us working on it. So to measure that change brought in because of the action itself is something that is hugely important, right? So, whether that change will occur anyway, That change is brought by someone else. That change is just, rising waters lift all the boat. So, we need to measure that change intentionally. It's not going to be perfect, but I think, at least we're going to start with the SROI as one of the measurement that is globally, at least is globally, used as a start.
Thank you. That's right, Steve, thank you. It's a great question. I come to 2:30 tomorrow afternoon for the panel. Without advancements in impact measurement that we're now seeing around the world, we wouldn't be talking about being able to progress, I think, as fast as we're going to be able to progress and make this paper success revolution and innovation occur. And the reason for that is because it's no surprise in this room that there are mountains and mountains of data that are on computer around the world. What's really happened is there's no one that's gone in there and has been able to mine that data, to actually focus that data, to actually source it, and then put it into whatever metric you're going to measure. And that's being done by people. I've always said one of the most exciting jobs right now around the world is to become a data mining manager. It's a huge need by all governments. And what we're doing in the United States is it tends to be the academic world to some extent, as well as there are literally data companies of extravagant capacity and wealth now that are forming. And the foundations and/or the states will bring in these people, and they will put them in alongside of a state government, a city government, county government, and they will be young people with tremendous creative minds who then go into an issue area, pull all the administrative data that exists for the last as long as it's available, 20, 25 years, and begins to see what we call a counterfactual emerge, meaning that if people were going to be going to jail, what actually happened to that 17 to 23-year-old group of people historically? We can now determine what happened to that group of people historically on a county, city, or state level. Once you have that data, that means that's what's going to happen regardless of any preventive program. Over here, you create a new preventive program. You can then actually look and say, we call it randomized control trials, we call it differences approaches, but these are processes by which you can say, here's the treatment group, here is the control group, and you start to look at what happens between those two groups on a very totally randomized basis. The other thing that's very important to know is, and this has been true in the medical field, randomized control trials used to cost millions of dollars, and they only could pick a snapshot in time. As I said, with 30 years of data, you can start to look at movies. And movies that now can focus on, I said, well, how many for Massachusetts? 3 metrics. Not thousands of metrics, but 3 metrics. A lot less cost to do these trials. So there's a huge effort going on about impact. And that's not just social, it's social issues, it's business issues, and that's leading the charge on everything we're talking about here. I think it's behind the scenes a little bit, but I think what an exciting field from an occupation point of view, and also it'll change the way we fundamentally look at our procurement.
More questions?
You get that.
Hi. Yeah, I think it's been a great discussion. Well, I'd like to direct a question to Richard. Okay, I have done.
Just two.
Okay. Well, I've come across some reading about that in America, that some of the ethnic groups, they kind of like pull their peer group back when their friend trying to achieve. It's like, do you want to be right? When one try to achieve. I mean, does that create a powerful resistance to your work?
So you're saying the whole back, what the services are the test?
In general, I mean,
So the individual.
is that there will be a holding back force?
The community doesn't know.
Oh, you mean that's in real life versus what's really being touched?
It's only the drug that I can break away from.
Yeah, like a cycle. that they're already in a cycle. There are programs right now, I'm thinking of the counterfactual idea, but where things are happening to groups of people that there are no preventive programs against it. That's what I'm hearing. So this is happening, there's no effort to try to pull them out, make them change their lives, go into a different way into the community. And so if there is some like education, foster care, with duly involved youth in the states where we're tackling this and saying we have to change the circle. And only by putting in these patient success programs are we able to try to pull them out. Child abuse is another example. So I'm not sure if that answers your question that you asked.
Oh, I think my question is, I'm trying to say is like, I think like no other culture, I mean, okay, particularly in Hong Kong.
Yes.
We don't have a culture say that, okay, if your friend trying to achieve and move forward, and the friend will say, okay, you want to be white? And so by applying social peer pressure, by holding him back. So do you, I mean, in your work, do you come across this kind of holding back force?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, the key thing is, I'll take what we're doing right now in Massachusetts, if I'm hearing there's a tremendous peer pressure to hold back on changing both in the government from the standpoint of should they change or not, and also in the community, if you're referring to the community side itself. Is that what you-
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's what I mean.
So what's happening in the community is that the NGO or the service provider has taken on a much bigger role and has become very important in terms of what I call rigor, relentlessness to actually stop the peer pressure to make a difference and remove them, change the community lives, etc. So it's that role, it's not so much government in this case, it's the service provider themselves, NGOs taking on a more aggressive role in trying to eliminate this peer pressure of making change.
Yeah, so it does exist.
Yes, it does. Yes.
There's a follow-up question actually from the panel.
I actually wanted to learn from Richard on this pay for success model that you mentioned. So is it really, so if the project works, then the government would pay, right? If the project doesn't work, then the investor would sort of lose the money or get less return. So isn't it a bit almost sort of a gambling between, or not gambling, but like win or lose situation between the investors versus the government? So is it real economic savings in between by having this nice financial arrangement? Does it actually accomplish the creation of social capital by having this financial arrangement, which is very nice?
I mean, being a former investment banker, the funders of these new social innovation projects will not even begin to go into this project or into any investment in a business without being absolutely convinced that there is a resilient, two things, that there's a strong cash flow model that has been approved by all parties, which then, if that cash flow model is approved by all parties, if there is a contractual obligation on the part of the government. Very important, I think, which I didn't mention, but what's very important here is you can appreciate when you're dealing with these types of investments, they're not short-term. They tend to be sometimes 6 years, 6 to 7 years. What about change of administration in a government? What about government risk? What about payment risk? So when we put these projects together, we have to spend a lot of time with the government entities themselves who are obligated to these new investors that they're going to get repaid, because otherwise they're not going to give them the investment funds to scale up, etc. So what that means is, and I'll give you an example, in one of the states, the governor and this legislature appropriated $50 million US, which has then gone into a sinking fund trust, which in simple terms just every year is funded. A sinking fund is actually funded for the amount of success payments that are required to pay back the investors. If the government fails to make those payments under the contracts that are set up, the full faith and credit of the government's bonds go into jeopardy. the credit rating agencies can lower the bond ratings of the state government. I would point out something, because I've lived overseas and done these types of projects overseas. That is not a guarantee. That's still a moral obligation, not a financial guarantee. But it's at least starting to get the process so that investors can feel safe about putting the funds into these projects. Is that helpful?
Questions from the floor? If not, may I invite some of my good friends, maybe someone from Vietnam. It's one of my favorite. Can you give us a little bit on your comment overall on the topic that we talked about, and then maybe you can explain a bit on the situation right now from Vietnam, so that we can broaden our views on the overall issue.
Okay, thank you, Francis. Nice introduction. Good afternoon. My name is Oanh. I come from CISIC. It's an intermediary and supporting organization for social enterprise in Vietnam. So in terms of social entrepreneurship and social enterprise, of course, for the country of Vietnam, it's a very new concept and it's a new development tendency or phenomenon. When I agree with you that when you mention about social entrepreneurship, we are talking more about the movement, about engagement, about the people come from business sector. How can they adopt social entrepreneurship and become more social? And about the NGO who can become more business in the operation. Okay, so I listened to the very good example from US, from Hong Kong and another country. Quite impressive, but for the country like Vietnam, like as you mentioned about the BOP, we are still as a developing country, so the need or the demand, the social value is a little bit different than the social value existing in the developed country. So that is the same for the corporate when they engage and they try to engage and to address the social problem, social value. To create a social value, I can see that sometimes we have a practice of having the MNC come from very developed countries, operating in Vietnam, and they apply the CSR strategy or whatever. But it's also sometimes we think that it's still the gap between the MNC CSR strategy with the really local gap, local need. And this is the gap need to be filled by the collaboration with the more grassroots organization, like NGO, social enterprise, or local authority. In terms of we are both like the end user of the product, the employer, or for like the problems, people who identify the problem as well. That is my observation in the country of Vietnam, that when we working with the CSR, when you try to influence the MNC working in social entrepreneurship and social enterprise, a little bit difficult to change the strategy, because the strategy is quite top-down and is created with the people sitting in the headquarters in New York or in Hong Kong or somewhere else. So I wish that if we can have more bottom-up, the people who come from the representative of the grassroots movement, like CISIC, and other people with a very local base, and we can participate in the corporate CSR strategy or the program, and we can communicate and raise our voice earlier, not only when the policy and program is already developed, and then we start like implementing. So that's my observation. Thank you.
No, I could respond in general. I'm going to invite another friend, maybe Fionn, my new corporate friend. From corporate perspective, why you are here? Why and how? He's one of the very passionate corporate, a founder of a big corporate. She actually is very keen in looking for solutions. And what is your barrier or challenges that in your mind now, and then why you came to this point?
Thank you very much, Francis, for the invitation of question, and thanks a lot for all the speakers sharing. I'm highly inspired by your sharing. And back to my organization, in fact, my company is operated in a highly social responsible way, and in view of the social needs of issue in the society, we really want to go further and make more contribution. And that's why over the past 12 months, I start to reach out, get to know Francis and understand more what is social enterprise and how it is operated. In fact, I have a question. I want to know, as a commercial organization, what are the first few steps that you will recommend to start with in order to generate more social capital for the society?
I think in that aspect, maybe Richard could help us to explain. But lastly, may I bother Annie? You can give us a little comment as a RS Group, as a pioneer social justice in Hong Kong, can give us a lot. I think on your thoughts.
Actually, I'm curious. Can I try to somehow find out who's in the audience? So how many people are actually from the private sector?
How many corporate?
Corporates? Higher, can't really see. And NGO sector? And who are the rest? Students? Are there students?
Government?
Government?
Government.
Universities?
Investors.
It still doesn't add up.
Unemployed?
For some reason, I'm not sure.
Unemployed?
Yeah, I think that it's just to kind of get a sense of who's really interested in what's going on. Not sure what to say. Appreciate all the different viewpoints. I think Rick shared kind of a little bit of the frontier in terms of how to manage capital and direct capital in a much bigger way, and also collaborating with government to deliver much needed services. I think one question people have in Hong Kong in particular, because the government apparently is sitting on a pile of cash, they don't really feel as much a need to tap in private capital in order to deliver services. And so maybe the motivation for them to do something different is not the fiscal motivation, could be something else. I think it's something for maybe within the government for you to think about. I think for Richard's presentation, I think I totally agree. It has to come from the heart. It's aligning the heart with the head. I do get a little frustrated with the slow kind of pace at which the CSR conversation is developing in Hong Kong and in Asia generally. Maybe it's starting to change. I think I'm going to sound like Jackie Chan here. In the sense that I hope it's not going to be more of these natural disasters that's going to be pushing people, companies, corporates, to think about what they're doing and their contribution to it directly or indirectly to how to manage these natural disasters. But it could be that, or some other big crisis, before they will go. What you're saying is really a complete mindset shift. I know Stephen has worked a lot in terms of trying to get investors to change their minds about how they invest. I know there's going to be a talk about ethical consumption or ethical capitalism or something following this panel. I think it's I shouldn't say easy, but it's easier because it's more tangible for consumers to choose kind of the socially better good or service. It's a little more difficult for investors for two reasons. One is a little too far removed, right? How many investors actually feel connected with the companies in which they invest, if you do that at all, right? And secondly, it's kind of less their issue, right? How do I connect? I don't feel connected as an investor in terms of what the business does, in terms of all these externalities. Whether they have a huge environmental footprint, or are they engaged in fair labor practices. As an investor in this, in Hong Kong in particular, you have a lot of people who just trade shares in companies without really thinking about what you're trading. I think it's a much harder sell, but it's necessary because, to your point, Rick, it's also putting pressure on companies to change. Where does that come from? That comes from the investors as well. So I think, in the investor community, in the corporate community, in government, they all need to be looking at some kind of mindset shift, but in a way that speaks to their core purposes of being.
Thank you. May I get Rick and Stephen maybe want to respond to Annie's comments on this as well?
Can I ask if there is any last round of questions? And we are going to close the panel here. All right, so let's start with, one more here? All right, thank you. Can we pass the microphone here? Thanks.
I just remember one of the comments was many people want to share success stories. They don't want to talk about the lessons learned. And you go to a lot of conferences and you don't really hear the lessons learned. That's the thing it's all learned from. But it's not going to be at conferences where the companies sponsor the panels, they are represented on the panels, and it's bad advertising. Talk about lessons learned. What's the best way to get at those lessons? Get at I guess there's a real treasure of experience when you make a mistake. There's a lot of mistakes have been made. So how do we get at that?
I have a lot of value lessons myself to share. And in fact, I was just sharing that it's absolutely, my background is 11 years as an investment banker. So the best thing I can do is PowerPoint and Excel spreadsheets, right? So I'm very good at that, by the way. So I can do it for 16 hours nonstop. But after investment banking, my first project that I really wanted to do is organic farming, right? Just like food, helping farmers, helping the poor. Who is the poorest in the country, in China? Villages, right? So go to the poorest region that I can help the farmers. That was my first thought. So become a banker. I actually take classes in farming, agriculture. I bring in my boots and stuff like that and be a farmer. So I learned a hard lesson that farming is really hard. No, farming is really hard. Managing farmers is even harder, by the way. So training, managing farmers is really hard, and obviously distributing logistics. I remember we have a big vendor in multinational fast food distribution, so in Guangdong, and then we have a farm in Yunnan. So actually transporting the tomatoes from Yunnan to Guangzhou, being a first-time, whatever operational manager, I was like, so why is the rejection rate 90%? So obviously, these guys have a high rejection rate, so the tomatoes has to be like exact that size, right? So we were trying to obviously build communities, help the farmers, train them, and elevate the salaries. So I agree with you that I learned a lot, right? Not by spending millions of dollars lost with my partners, but through the process. It does occur to me that social enterprises is not just about having a good heart, but it takes a lot of professionalism. And going back to Fion's question, actually, so I do appreciate companies that in their own line of business. For example, I heard you are in beauty business. So I would actually think hard about what sort of social capital you can create by just being in the beauty business that you are in, without actually, going across the line of picking up another expertise, like, from a banker to a farmer. So, it sounds nice, but it might not create the most social impact. So I actually do believe that professionalism brings, innovations only come from professionalism. If you think about it, right? We can't innovate if we don't know what we're talking about. We can only innovate if we are the best in what we do. So I think that, I won't underestimate, the expertise that you have in your own industry, and actually to be able to create that social capital, and that no one can answer that question but yourself. I think that would be my big failure lesson and learn and reflections.
I just add to Steve, I think that in your comment on lessons learned, we do professionalism, number one. Number two, if you're professionalism, you've lost your ego. And therefore you do webinars, you do sessions freely around the best attributes to create the ultimate success. Now, I'll give a quick example. We're in Illinois right now doing something in which we're co-responding with 3 NGOs, to speak about it from this perspective. We're not going to choose the size, but we're lending our professionalism to those respondents who are going to go for a large transaction to make social impact and innovation happen. What's going to be the deciding factor? That's their privileged information as to their program and how their own program is going to be impactful. But there's things around that submission that that will happen regardless of who wins. So that we are being called upon as a resource to share our lessons learned. And those 3 responses will actually be better because of it. I can't predict what the government's going to choose, but I think because that's going to be the way they each differentiate themselves. But I think that's a great example to your point. Your question is that there has to be a point without sharing competitive intelligence that you can share your lessons learned, and people respect that. I think, and so we can always do better.
So where do you get started? I think a few things. One, start internally, not externally. I'm sure in the beauty business and what you're doing, you're talking about packaging, resources, people. You have ethical standards, whether you test on animals or not. I mean, there's a host of issues. Start there before you start giving money to an NGO or offsetting or green packaging, things like that. Like really look internally to the mission, and then look at maybe how you expand that into the society itself. And that could just be lending your own expertise as an entrepreneur to teach other entrepreneurs how to be just as successful as yourself. It takes many shapes. It's just really difficult. I mean, how do you learn from those who failed? Go to LinkedIn, find who went back to grad school after 3 years. It's really tough, and I think you won't find people talking about failures enough on stage, but they will certainly talk about them in the bar down the street, blitzing off. And I think the other thing is, a lot of times we're trying to learn from the leaders, and I don't think, I learn a lot more from those who've been on the ground, up to their boots in manure, trying to figure out why the organic manure doesn't work. Talk to the people who aren't the talkers, but are just literally shoveling the manure all day long, and you're going to learn a lot about what works, what doesn't work. They don't consider it failure or success. They just call it kind of integrative or innovation. Like we're testing these 3 things. My friends at One Earth Design, they had like 51 designs on their solar cooker that they trial, and eventually got it right. They wouldn't consider any of those to be failures, even though if they tried to sell them, they would have been. They consider it to be, learn through failure. Fail fast, fail often, but learn. Right? And I think to Annie's point, it's a lot of work to go. Overall, but I think that we're certainly getting there, and I'm far more optimistic now because of the fact that I used to talk a lot about volunteering, offsets, environmental donations, things like that. And now I'm talking to the world's largest firms about how to change their business model at the Asia. And then what's interesting is the Asia people are saying, we want to do it because nobody's doing it globally. We want to prove it here. And they're going to spend a lot of money trying to work out what that means. But they're starting to see, because in Asia, again, I'm going to go back to my presentation, the externalities are tangible here. And that's a big advantage, sadly. So back to your idea of, does it take disasters? I think every business is going to face a different disaster. It's all about paying at the end of the day. Are you going to pay for it in your market? Are you going to pay for it in your supply chain? Are you going to pay for it with your consumers? In China we have citizens just come and light a factory on fire because, they don't have any alternative. Is it going to be that level of disaster? I think everyone's got to have their own their pain threshold, and when they reach it, they make the transition.
There's one quick thing, Annie. I love your comment about the government when they're in a funded position that they don't need. They're not facing bankruptcy or facing issues where they need to desperately raise the cash. In some ways, it's a very enviable position to be in. We have governments that we're working with where either the NGO or service provider can finance the social service programs and innovation themselves, and or the government can. My position is, gosh, what a position to pull together early, in which you've got that working group again. That should be all the more reason to even accelerate this, because all that time period that I'm out there in the capital markets trying to raise the capital, because of shortages, I don't have to deal with that. So I've just cut off 5 or 6 months at least. But that should accelerate the willingness to get a collaboration at an early stage and agreement upon the impact objectives of the government and any other parties that are going to be involved in the innovation. It's a fantastic position to be in. It's all win-win for everybody. And I'd heartily encourage, I've talked to some people already in my earlier meetings this week about this, that the Hong Kong government has a great opportunity here. And I think at an early stage, getting these working groups together would be very, very positive for the citizens.
Yeah, I was just talking one thing about failures. I do think that that ties to the SIE fund because for a venture capital fund, I think a successful one probably have 1 or 2 home runs, 5 complete failures, and 2 or 3, 2 to 5 okay, decent, break even sort of, or 1 or 2 times probably. So I mean, if the SIE fund can have that, I think that's pretty good, because that would outperform a normal venture capital fund.
All right, we come to the end. Let's look beyond. We talked about, let's paint the future. We need 30 seconds comment from you guys. 10 years later, what is the utopia, the future of business or social innovation in your mind? And can you describe in 30 seconds about your future, the picture that you thought?
Our future?
Yes, no. Overall, I think what I said about
We're going to take that would be
500 million is not enough for 10 years. I think, as you heard, no matter we like it or not, the world is changing. A lot of rethink is going on from the business sector, from the investment sector. So I think if we don't imagine and dream to the end, I think we are not going to be going in the right way. So in your mind, what do you think after 10 years? What will it like in the world, in the economy, in the business?
I mean, in 10 years' time, I'm predicting that we're going to see a fundamental revolution around the entire procurement of social services in the world because of the ability to measure data. You will now be no longer able to hide behind a political agenda or a cost reimbursement agenda of simply saying, I'm paying based upon treatment going into a program as opposed to paying for impact and outcomes. There will be such transparency around procurement of services that you will truly see mammoth increases in the improvement of the communities around us. And a lot of it's going to be driven by data. That's going to drive it.
Forget about the 500 million people.
I can't. It's so tempting. I'll talk to you afterwards. Okay, so a couple comments. First is, the next 10 years will be the most important 10 years of our next 100. That is very clear to me, particularly in the developing countries of the world. China alone is going to put 300 million more people in the cities in the next 15 years. And if they don't fix their systems, we're looking at real pain at city and country level. The second trend I think that's going to be very interesting is the fact that many of the baby boomers will be transitioning out of positions of leadership to Gen X. Now, if we can just pull our faces away from our mobile phones, we might actually have, the Gen X's that I teach and millennials, they have a much different view of goals, vision, than baby boomers. I'm not saying that's good, bad, or otherwise, but it's certainly going to make the last few years of this 10 years to be very interesting. And then the last thing is, I think that we're going to see successful models come out of this that can be replicated. There are some that are already being held on to, but I don't think that they are the models of the future. But I think we're going to start seeing where businesses like Unilever, Interface, meet the solar panel groups, meet One Earth Design, and where models that are kind of shared IP, government to government, can actually finally bring out some of these issues and kind of create real successful, scalable models, even if it's on a local city basis.
10 years from now, you and I either have less hair or more gray hair. We have more gray hair. So, but I'm cautiously optimistic. I think I'm cautiously optimistic because I do think that sustainability actually become more good business. If you look at, for example, a lot of the clean tech, clean energy, they are more economical and sustainable going over time. So I'm cautiously optimistic.
I also chip in this dream. Richard talked about the Generation X, but in my view, I would say the Generation V is coming up. They talked about the values. They are well trained with a lot of social issues and things. If we could trigger on these values in their heart, that would be our future. So I'm not sure about you. I really enjoyed this panel, and then I got a lot of insightful information from all these panels. Let's give them a big hand. I know it's quite confusing the activity, so we'll try to get rid of it. So forget about the 500 people. We're not invited anymore.
I'll take the 250.
We got some souvenir. Let's just send them all in one go, and then we take a picture. Oh. Thank you. Want to take a picture? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, I didn't get it.